Okay. Good afternoon all, and welcome to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's Cabinet meeting of the 10th of April 2025. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and Chair of the meeting as the Leader of the Vale of Glamorgan Council and the Cabinet Member for Performance and Resources. We're using the Council's hybrid platform today, and so as well as being live streamed, the meeting will be recorded and uploaded to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's website as soon as is practicable after the meeting and for later viewing. All participants should avoid activating their microphones so that we don't have any background noise or feedback when other participants are speaking. And if anyone wishes to speak, they should indicate via the button on their microphone if in the chamber, or using the online raise hand function. As ever, the chat function is only to be used to highlight any technical issues or to get the attention of the Democratic Services Officer or myself. It would be Democratic Services, I should imagine. So with that finalised, we can move on to the agenda proper, and the agenda item 1 is just apologies for absence. I only have one, and that's the Deputy Leader, Councillor Brooks, who can't be with us today. I understand we're waiting. Everybody else is either in the chamber or online. That's super. So agenda item 2, if I can move to the minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of March. Can I move those as an accurate record of the meeting?
And I'm happy to second, Chair.
Thank you. And I can't see any dissent anywhere, so we're happy to agree those. Agenda item 3 is any declarations of interest, and if there are, the nature of such interests. I haven't been notified of any.
No declarations of interest for this meeting. Thank you.
Super, thank you. So that's fine. And then on to the references for today's meeting. Have a look. This is the reference from Governance and Audit Committee on the 17th of February 2025, and it relates to the Audit Wales report on financial sustainability of local government. It may seem that we've talked about this a lot because we've had the financial sustainability of the Vale of Glamorgan, we've had motions to full council, and we've also had the financial sustainability of local government overall in Wales. And so this is the reference from there. There were quite a lot of conversation that was passed on to us. There was comparison of usable reserves, and that's actually quite an interesting item in the actual report, to look at the level of reserves, but also the movement in reserves, and it reinforces the fact that if reserves aren't used prudently, they won't be there in future. So some local authorities have very little usable reserves. We are in a reasonable position with ours. The recommendations that that Governance and Audit made was, first of all, they noted it, then they said that to send the report and the comments of the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee that had been passed through them to Cabinet, and also their own comments. So the types of the comments they made was that that central government should ensure that local authorities were sufficiently resourced. They talked about the levels of reserves, and that they said there was an opportunity for Welsh Government to consider the level of usable reserves. So I think that there are normally conversations about that. And then, as mentioned, there was the reference from the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny, and their comments were to be brought on to us. They discussed the Welsh Government be requested to consider multi-year settlements. Well, that's actually already being discussed. A lot depends on the ongoing settlement from UK Government. They talked about doing some comparison work on lessons learned through Governance and Audit Committee. Well, that's a discussion with Governance and Audit Committee and their democratic officers. Discussion about community engagement, work report about digital services. Well, that is for the committee to decide, and also looking at potential external guidance for budget setting process and a review of ALM provision. So those were all handed on to us via Governance and Audit. Don't think there's anything with a specific action for us, so I'm happy to move that we note.
And I second.
Thank you. And is everyone content with that?
Yes, thank you.
Super. Reference, agenda item 5, another reference, and that's in relation to Q3 progress against external regulatory recommendations and proposals for improvement. And the scrutiny at the Governance and Audit Committee had an overview of that. At Q3 of last year, it was good to see that the vast majority of the actions had been attributed a green status under the RAG status that we use. There were a number of ongoing actions in the Insight Tracker, and the discussion in Governance and Audit was looking at progress to date in addressing the recommendations, and also proposals made by the Council's external regulators, including the removal of completed actions, and they referred their views to Cabinet for consideration. So the only recommendation they made, which is of relevance to us, is that Cabinet be advised of the Governance and Audit Committee's recommendation endorsing the removal of completed actions from the Strategic Insight Board Insight Tracker. I'm happy to move that is passed on to officers for their action.
And I'm happy to second.
Thank you. And we're on to agenda item 6. This is a reference again from Governance and Audit Committee on the 24th of March. And this is Audit Wales recommendations for governance of the planning service. This is over to Ruba to tackle this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Cabinet will remember that we endorsed this proposed planning protocol in a Cabinet meeting, I think in February of this year. And then it was referred to Governance and Audit, which, as you say, met on the 24th of March. So they've been exceedingly busy. So the matter is now back to Cabinet to consider the feedback and recommendations of the Governance and Audit Committee. And I'll just summarise, if I may, a couple of those issues. So there are a few issues raised about the wording of the documents, and these were a matter of tweaking just to provide additional clarity. So there are, a few sort of minor changes and consistency in the way that certain terms are used, and officers are very happy to make those amendments and those changes. You'll note that there were other, there were certain other matters which were highlighted, and they do really relate to our constitution. So, for example, it was about the length of time that speakers were allowed to speak at committee meetings, and also the maximum length of meetings. In relation to those suggestions, the protocol does cite existing provisions from the protocol so that it's consistent with the wider constitution. So if at any stage we as a council decide to change any of those, those issues like length of speaking time and so on, then obviously that would be something that which we can amend within this protocol. There was also a suggestion of by the chair, if I recall, to make alterations to the site visit protocol. And again, it's the plan. This planning document is consistent with all the parts of the Constitution as it exists now. So we can consider those further amendments, but we'd have to do that along with the legal and democratic services. And again, that would be a matter for council to consider. And then just that there was also, I think it's worth mentioning, there was some feedback from a member of the public in relation to accountability in decision making and the robustness of decisions, and planning committees' overturns and reasons for those decisions. And there was I think there was a suggestion from that comment from the member of the public that training should be mandatory and members should be assessed following that training. So the members of the planning committee, and as all of you will know, the existing protocol provides that members should not participate in any decision making at meetings dealing with planning matters if they've not attended any mandatory planning training, which is prescribed by the head of sustainable development and the monitoring officer, and or if it's determined by cabinet and council. And it goes on to state that all planning committee members should endeavour to attend any other specialised training sessions provided, since these will be designed to extend members' knowledge of planning law or regulations and procedures. So codes of practice and development assist in carrying out the role properly and effectively. It's not considered that assessments are reasonably required post-training, and members will be required to deal with matters appropriately and in accordance with the protocol and the material planning considerations in each meeting. And again, if we were to make those types of changes regarding mandatory training for planning members and some kind of review, then again, that would be a matter for our constitution, which is, again, if there are those changes, we can make any amendments to the protocol in due course. But as it is, planning members are required to attend mandatory training. So just to summarise it, the matters that were raised around the way that the documents were worded can easily be rectified. And as I've said, the other matters are a matter for our constitution. And updated drafts of the protocol and the terms of reference and the scheme of delegation will be provided to council to reflect the matters that I've just outlined. So I would ask us to note those recommendations and the changes that I've suggested, Chair.
Thank you, Ruba. I can see that Councillor Wilson is indicating.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ruba, for that presentation. I think there's an interesting point that is mentioned on page 2 about the length of time of meetings. Now, sometimes I know there was a query about whether 4 hours is reasonable, as opposed to perhaps shorter time. But the fact is, though, when you're on planning committee, as I am, on the planning committee being vice chair, it is an important issue that we got to determine applications within the time, because if we have an issue whereby we don't determine something, because say, for instance, we run out of time, we may be done for non-determination, and we can't really afford to have that as a council, because could be costs against us. So I do think we need to see it. We need to have a commonsensical approach, I think, when it comes to these sort of matters as well. And I know that we've changed the amount of delegation. So we have considered reduced the amount of planning applications that go to committee. But that means that we can properly examine those ones that need to, and hopefully we won't have those issues of lengthy meetings. But sometimes it does happen.
Yes. Thanks, Mark. Yeah, I mean, as I said, it would be a matter for us to agree as a council anyway, if we were to somehow limit the meeting. So, are you seconding it, Mark?
I'm happy to second it, but I'm more than happy to second your mood that you note the findings from the governance and audit and their series of points that they've raised.
Thank you both. I can see that Councillor Williams, Eddie, you're indicating as well.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. It was interesting, some of the points that were made, and you're quite right that some of them regards the Constitution, whatever. We've gone through that process several times as a council, and got to a certain point. The issue about training of members, I just wanted to point out that if there's any major applications that are considered of importance, and I'm talking about locally Barry, the biomass plant, then things like that, the officers will give us some pre-training, advice on the particular applications, so that we can look at the planning considerations, material considerations, and often it's an explanation of what is and isn't included in an application. So I do believe that the officers provide that, and most members do attend those planning committee. Bear in mind that the committee has a number of 17 members, so it wouldn't rely on one individual who doesn't understand what the requirements are to influence that. So I'm on the whole content with this, and I was happy to second your comments, Ruba. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. So you've got two seconders and a proposer, but you've got everybody in agreement here. So we'll leave it to Democratic Services officers to fight it out, that's agreed by everybody. Thank you. So now we go on. I'll take the next three items together. These are references in relation to reshaping scrutiny, and that was from the Democratic Services Committee on the 21st of March, the Governance and Audit Committee on the 24th of March, and the Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee on the 26th of March. And I think at this point I need to thank you all for your flexibility in agreeing to change the cabinet date, and also to officers for actually facilitating that. There was an awful lot of discussion in scrutiny and governance and audit, and obviously Democratic Services Committee, about the proposals. And when cabinet sat down to try to consider those fully, we realised that actually we weren't going to be able to do that justice by the 3rd of April, and so moved cabinet back by a week. As such, all the recommendations that are in those three reports have actually been considered and are included in the main report. So on that basis, I would move that we note the recommendations of all of those reports, and we can consider it as alongside the main report. So I'm happy to move that.
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Mark. And is everybody happy to agree? Yeah. So we can move on to agenda item 10. If I can just adjust my screen to get it in. And so the report basically sets out a current scrutiny framework within Vale Glamorgan, and that's the basis of the work that's been done in terms of reshaping scrutiny. There's been a lot of discussion, this goes back to October last year, of what actually scrutiny is, what the arrangements the council has in place to discharge these functions, because there is obviously a scrutiny function, but there's also the the contribution to strategic planning within the council. It's looking at the feedback to date, how that could be improved in the future, and also how it can support the council in delivery of Vale 2030, the new corporate plan. So the final iteration was taken to Cabinet back on the 6th of March. There's been even more member engagement, not only with it going to committees, but also there have been member drop-in sessions as well on an ad hoc basis to make sure that everybody has an opportunity. And if these will go from here to full council, and if agreed there, it's intended that they will come into effect for the next municipal year. So looking through it, there is, you know, if you look at what scrutiny is supposed to be, the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny, who have expertise in this area, states that scrutiny often ties in with decision making and to development of major policies by the council. And I know that it's been our desire for a while for actually everybody in the council, you know, all 54 members, to be able to contribute to decision making and the development of major policies. We know there are some really, I mean, we can call them tricky issues, but they are difficult issues that we are coping with as a council. And not only would we want as many members as possible to be able to contribute their expertise, but actually I think many of us feel that sort of Vale residents should also have more opportunity to contribute their views, their expertise. So alongside when we do surveys and this sort of thing, that people should be able to participate in conversations. So maybe through task to finish work, scrutiny, investigations, that sort of thing, that we can develop that as well. So if you look at paragraph 110, it's actually the figures on there are quite telling in terms of the type of things that scrutiny committees are discussing. And the bottom bullet, which is sort of 33 out of 163 items that had been considered between last May and January of this year, only 20% of items led to robust scrutiny and considered proposals. And sometimes it's because when a reference goes, when a decision's been made in principle, there are discussions, but there are no recommendations coming back. So in that way, we wanted to strengthen that. You know, an awful lot of other things that were briefing type reports or democratic related items, sort of forward work programs, that sort of thing. And there are more effective ways of dealing with those, which frees up both member time and officer time. If you look at it not from a member side, but if you look at it from a member of the public side, on paragraph 1.14, and look at the survey that we undertook with Data Cymru, the Life in the Vale one, and it's hugely disappointing to see that over 60% of residents either felt strongly that the council didn't take residents' views into account when making a decision, and you know that's not acceptable. And the same, over 60% said that they'd attempted to influence a decision or decisions, but also only nearly 16% had attended a council meeting to do so. So we want to be far more accessible to members of the public. Last November, as we all participated, we had a panel performance assessment, and scrutiny was part of that consideration, and there were recommendations to do with that. So we were working, and there are, as was mentioned in the recommendations there, they felt that the strong local politics could be a force for good, but we needed to ensure civility in public life, because sometimes that isn't quite as it should be. So we should keep front and centre the need to encourage respectful and constructive debate. So all of this comes in with that. There's been some recommendations by Audit Wales as well. So, as I said, there were initial proposals that started off as far back as last October. And if you look at paragraph 2.8, that lists all the various meetings. And then in March of this year, the proposals going to committees. And as I said, from the recommendations, if you look at paragraph 211, it says, well, what did members say, and what the impact and response was to what they said, and in terms of structuring it. And we've taken those into consideration. And one of the prime things that we were looking at is, how do we achieve outcomes? Not outputs, not we don't want to count beans or say, well, we've discussed it 3 times. Well, what did that actually achieve? So this is about outcomes so that we can actually demonstrate those. So those are all laid out there. And there's, whether or not scrutinies were too big, or where housing goes, or where play should be. All these things have been taken into account and moved around. So feedback from members has actually been largely positive. People, all change is difficult, isn't it? But on the whole, people have said, yeah, we can see where this is going, but then have had concerns. So, and one of those was about changing from the existing 5 committees to 4. And that's one of the reasons why we actually took the extra week to fully consider this, to test out different ways, and bearing in mind it's not just headings of services. This is about outcomes and about how we can effectively scrutinise the outcomes within those services. And so it was felt that although they've moved around a bit, although the contents have moved around a bit, there will remain 4 scrutiny committees within the proposals. However, we also have to look at the joint scrutiny stuff as well. So there will be actions for a joint committee. If you have a look at sort of paragraph 2.15 onwards, that is the discussion that has taken place in terms of trying out different models, how the workload would work, how it all might work. And then 2.20 is the structure of the committees and their makeup. So a comprehensive report. It's not going, it will be going to full council. So I'm sure that we will have further discussion there before taking a final decision. One point is that with the change around, that the existing calendar of meetings will need to be adjusted in order to make it fit with this, but we don't see that there would be any major change in dates, just a skewing around of what committees were on those dates. So, as I said, it's going to go to full council. So if we take a look at the recommendations before us today, and that is recommendation 1, that Cabinet and full council notes the feedback received from the member briefing sessions, Democratic Services Committee, Governance and Audit Committee and Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee surrounding proposed changes to scrutiny arrangements. Secondly, that the proposed changes are endorsed by Cabinet and that we recommend those changes for approval by full council at its meeting on the 28th of April 2025. 3, that Cabinet recommends that full council approves the policies identified, and that's in Appendix D, to be updated to reflect any changes in scrutiny arrangements which complies with legislation and statutory guidance. 4, that Cabinet recommends that full council approves the calendar of meetings, which is Appendix E, to be updated to give effect to changes in scrutiny arrangements. 5, that full council endorse the commitment to review the implementation of any proposed arrangements after approximately 12 months of implementation to ensure the desired outcomes of reshaping scrutiny are being achieved, and to consider any amendments which may be required. I think last time we changed scrutiny and then it just stayed as it is. This time we should keep evaluating, seeing if it's actually delivering what we want. And finally, so that it can get to full council on the 28th of April, that the use of the urgency procedure set out at section 1514 of the council's constitution be granted to allow the proposed changes to be considered by full council at its meeting on the 28th of April 2025. And I'd move.
And I'm happy to second.
Thank you. And we've got lots of people with hands up now. Councillor Birch, Rhiannon, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. I welcome this. I think that the increased use of task and finish groups will be very useful, because at the moment I don't think members always have the opportunity to be able to put their views forward or to be able to research topics that come to a scrutiny committee. At the moment, they're very often presented with a report and they don't feel there's much to say about it because the report has been so thorough. Whereas having been a member of a very successful and useful task and finish group in the last administration, which looked at the extra costs of schooling, and there were lots of good points raised by various people during the course of that group. Went out and visited schools where they were running uniforms, shops and so forth. There was a lot of detailed research into school trips and, how much that would impact on families with, multiple children or simply living in poverty. And I think that was a very useful group and people found their findings very interesting. I mean, that's my experience of a very successful task and finish group, and I look forward to other committees being able to do that in the same way. So I would welcome this, and with the fact that it's being looked at over 12 months, I think is long enough for us to see whether or not it can be really effective. Thank you.
Thank you. I couldn't agree more. It's quite amazing that there was one comment in one of the scrutiny committees that somebody said, I'll reserve speaking until we've got the finished report. But actually, that's a hugely lost opportunity that we should be contributing to how things could look right from the start. And no views should be discounted, whether that's members or members of the public. So hopefully the changes will allow us to be far more inclusive. Councillor John Gwynn, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Leader. I fully support comments made by Councillor Birch and also the details of the report. It's not the first time that we've had committees of 4 committees, and we've had those many times in the past, and quite simply, task and finish groups, they certainly play a huge part, which I currently feel that we haven't been doing for a long time. So, yes, I fully support. Thank you.
Thanks, Gwyn. There was a really good one years ago, which was to do with transport and traffic and stuff. And a lot of the ideas they came up with actually fed into changes for quite a number of years. So, yeah, it's really interesting to think about what we can do. Councillor Perks, you want to speak?
Thank you, Leader. I wanted to concur with what the Councillor Birch and Councillor John had to say about the task and finish groups. Sort of in the last administration, I know there was another one on period poverty, which we sort of took forward and what we did with that, you know, and address that area. And the other one was housing and homelessness, which has been quite successful with the development of use of modern methods of construction and working in partnership stuff. But I suppose this, you know, it really helps with policy development, which is what you spoke about, Leader. But also, you know, sort of my own sort of committee now, if you like, will now cross two areas, which I think is useful because you get to see the subject more in the round with the other sort of old scrutiny committees, if you like, and cabinet areas. So rather than working in silos, you're actually understanding the round picture rather than just your particular area. So I think that would be really useful as well. And I think it gives councillors more opportunity to sort of develop their knowledge within different areas as well.
Super. Yes, some really valid points. But as I said, this is going to full council for further discussion. So I would imagine we'll all be contributing there as well. So no other comments, no dissension. So that's agreed. Thank you. So on to agenda item 11. This is a part 1 report, and there will be a separate part 2 report afterwards for the sort of commercially confidential parts of the report. And this is another one I think I've already seen mentioned in social media. This is our Microsoft licenses that we have to renew. They were last we entered into an agreement in 2024 for Microsoft E5 licensing, and that covered all council end users, which, if you look at the figures, that actually applies to approximately 2,460 users. And adopting an E5 license provided a significant uplift in both functionality and security. And if you look at paragraph 1.2, that actually outlines, you know, the enhanced productivity, it improves security, because we obviously, like any large organisation, we are subject to challenges in terms of cybercrime. Modernised communications, which actually means that we can get rid of the cost of telephone lines within the organisation, and we can have telephones that work on the internet, and the increased use of cloud services. Cost savings have been achieved. An estimated cost to reintroduce these capabilities in the absence of the licenses, so if we didn't have these, would be about £250,000. The existing enterprise agreement is set to expire in July 2025. The cost to us in 2024 was £927,147 and 8p. I don't know what that was. So in terms of procurement, if you look at paragraph 2 onwards, they're looking at the framework that we're using. It's known as an SPA 24 framework, and that provides a significant cost saving per licence for the public sector. The financial details to it are in part 2 due to commercial sensitivities. But if you look at the paragraph 2.7, where it discusses sort of licence optimisation, that we've undertaken a profiling project back in Q4 of 2024, and that assessed the Microsoft product usage, I can't speak this afternoon, and looked at certain key considerations such as security retention, alternative licensing for frontline staff, so people that are working in a mobile capacity, looking at academic licenses, whether or not we've got eligibility to that, which has got cost savings. And what we might do in the future is covered in paragraph 2.9, looking at expanding Power Apps usage. So as I said, at the moment we are making increasing usage of Power BI, migrating the staff intranet over to SharePoint, a different facility, reducing long-term cloud storage costs, and exploring AI integration. So this is very flexible. But as I said, in terms of where we go with this part of the report is for noting, and then we will revisit it along with the financial aspects later on in the agenda at agenda item 14. So therefore, the recommendation is that Cabinet notes the contents of the report with a view to taking decisions on the investment in the council's ICT infrastructure as described in this report, and the proposed route to market within the Part 2 report later on in this agenda. And I'd move.
And I'm happy to second.
Thank you, Mark. And yeah, everybody's happy with that, so that's agreed. Agenda item 12 is another report where we have the Part 1 report, and then we will obviously have a subsequent Part 2 report when it actually discusses the appointment of the contractors on the framework agreement. We've discussed this before. This was about the new way forward in terms of delivering disability adaptations within houses, and it's a piece of work we've been working on for quite a while. I think it's a major step forward, so that people coming out of hospital, people who are disabled, are actually able to live in their homes for as long as they want, and so the new disability adaptations process will deliver that for them. The council intends to appoint 4 suppliers after the procurement exercise, with 2 reserve suppliers, so that we always have contractors on hand, but also people who get to know the field, get to know our expectations, and then can be more efficient and more effective as the greater they build up their skills. So there was a procurement exercise carried out, and that was in full compliance with the requirements in the Public Contract Regulations 2015, and which was in the invitation to tender. So we've got about 58,000 dwellings in the Vale. The majority, over 50,000, are actually privately owned. But 11% of those privately owned are privately rented. So there are challenges there as well. So as I said, back in 23 we approved the new independent living policy, and this will move it forward. So all that we have to do today, as I said, on this part of the report, is that to note the contents of the report with a view to taking decisions on the award of the contract, detailed within the Part 2 report later on this agenda. So I'm happy to move that.
And I'm happy to second.
Thank you. And, Gwyn, can I see you've got your hand up?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that this is a vital service for so many people across the Vale of Glamorgan, and I fully support it. Thank you.
Thanks, Gwyn. That's really good. And everyone else in agreement? Yes. So that is agreed. So I don't have any urgent items today, you'll be pleased to know. And but as I said, we do have 2 Part 2 items related to the last 2 items, agenda item 11 and agenda item 12. And as they're matters considered to be confidential, the meeting will need to move into private session where confidential matters can be discussed under part 2. So therefore, I will ask for Cabinet to agree to move part 2 and ask the Cabinet Officer to stop the recording of this open session and ensure that no members of the public are present after this point, and only to allow relevant parties to remain to hear the detail of the items to be discussed. Following the meeting, however, the outcome of the part 2 discussions will be formally captured as part of the minutes of the meeting and will advise all parties of the final decisions of the Cabinet for the relevant items. So therefore, can I formally move part 2?
Can formally second.
Thank you,
Move to
Mark.
part 2.
And ask the Cabinet Officer to ensure that only relevant parties remain from this point on. And if you could confirm that the live stream has stopped when that has.